Hello YouTube, and welcome to a new episode of The Educated Barbarian. There was no installment last week because I was trying to consolidate my thesis for this series about Nietzsche. And so we are starting again today with the continuation of my argument of the previous episode, which, if you remember, if you saw it, was about faith, the death of faith, and what Nietzsche believes happened to humanity as a whole, and why men deteriorated to the point that nowadays they are essentially untermensch. All of that, of course, being connected with religion, which is why understanding the relationship between Nietzsche and religion is so important, because it's the basis of Nietzschean philosophy. So, as a quick summary of last week again, we spoke about faith. We spoke about the fact that faith was based on absurdity, and that if you refused to accept it, you lost what made faith so great. I proved that Nietzsche had nothing against faith, but that he had diagnosed the death of it, and it's the death that led to the version of religion that we see nowadays in the world, that has created again the type of subhumans that Nietzsche then attacks and goes on to describe in later terms during this passage in particular. So what we're going to be focusing on today is this very thing. It's the death of God. How did God die? What were the circumstances of his death, and what are the consequences of it? Again, if you remember the end of last week's episode, we spoke about the transvaluation of values. The fact that it used to be that faith and belief in God was in reality a humiliation of sorts that the strong would subject themselves to in order to, again, test or even in order to feel their own strength, because it was willing. They willingly humiliated themselves because they understood what it took. The issue is that religion spread to every single stratus of society, including the weak, and the problem is that the weak did not have the ability to suffer for the sake of faith or religion, and even took it as an insult to be told they had to suffer, and so they hijacked religion because there were a higher number of them. They took over and they turned religion on its head. They transvaluated every single moral tenet that religion was trying to install in the world, and they turned weakness into a virtue, and that's what we see nowadays. But we have to explain the how, because it's very easy to say that, and I sort of glozed over it last week where I quickly told you that yes, it was the slave insurrection that created the weaklings and the weakness that we find in religious ideology nowadays, and that polluted the entire movement in reality. But how is it even possible? It shouldn't make any sense. Well, we have first and foremost to look at what faith is from an outside perspective, because in truth, faith is the frustration of basic instincts. The thing is that if you understand why you frustrate your instinct, for example, if you are going to engage in some sort of fasting practice, you understand perfectly why you're hungry. So the pain of hunger is not something that is going to be taken as an insult or an offense by yourself, because you get why you're doing it. But if you don't understand it and you ask why, the why has no answer. And it is this immediate succession of opposites prompted by faith that causes the psychological dissonance that led to the death of faith. In truth, again, it's the explanation as to why the slave revolted in the first place. They did not understand why they had to be subjected to pain, and so they revolted against the pain, and by doing that, they got rid of faith and of the religion that came with it. But it's incredibly important to point out, because this same type of slave mentality and slave mindset towards religion is still present nowadays. And sadly, in a sad twist of events, psychology itself, which should be able to examine that type of phenomenon objectively, is also completely incapable of doing so. If you look at psychology of religion in particular, they are also entirely stumped by this succession of opposites. They also cannot explain the absurdity behind faith. And therefore, they cannot explain the dissonance that led so many people to turn their back on religion or change religion outright. Many people nowadays are entirely incapable of understanding devotion. They cannot understand worship. They cannot understand prayer. Why? It's because they do not have the necessary knowledge to be able to assess it. And psychology falls into the same pitfall. So psychology itself fails to explain it because it now sees the world through moralist opposition. And it's something to keep in mind because in Nietzschean philosophy, there is this underlying idea that the morality that you and I espouse nowadays comes directly from religion, which is paradoxical because we are supposed to have gotten rid of religion. So why did morality survive? Well, in reality, the version of religion that we know nowadays is mostly morality, meaning that if you take religion and you get rid of spirituality and faith, you are left with only tenets that don't really connect with the spirit. So they have to connect with something else. They connect with reality and they give birth to morality. But even in countries or in groups of people that have sort of transformed or again explored past religion, the morality remains, and that shouldn't be possible. It should have went away with religion. But because religion is a very useful tool to organize groups of humans and also to restrict their movements and their actions, the morality was actually kept by governments and even by groups of people and societies because they saw the benefit in doing so. But it creates a situation that's a little bit paradoxical because now our modern psychology is still infected by that morality that they then judge religion through without realizing that they are judging the religion by the very morality that the religion created, so they cannot explain the religion anymore because they don't even know where the system of thought that they utilize to understand the religion comes from. It's not that hard to understand, it's just convoluted, but it's a phenomenon that is going to come back, so it's important to say. And there is a quote by Nietzsche that exemplifies that greatly. It was believed here that a bad man was all at once turned into a saint. This is the understanding that psychology has of faith. They think that it's just something that you give to someone who is a bad person and it transforms them into a good person. This is the empty cult and the empty worship in truth that religion has become. We do not understand the mechanisms that religion used to put in place to morph men, because again, religion was attempting to transvaluate every single thing that made the ancient world what it used to be. It was an attempt to change humans in reality. It's even, we could even come close to saying that it was an attempt at genetic manipulation because it sought to empty humans entirely of their moral codex and replace it with a new one. And it's an attempt that worked perfectly well, but the issue is that it replaced it with a worse set of morals, and therefore it created worse humans. But what I just say is one, not super politically correct, and two, almost completely unexplored by psychology, because again, they don't understand what turned the bad man into the saint. Nietzsche sees that. He diagnosed that a long time ago, but to him, the formula, or at least the result of the formula, wasn't what we think it was. It's not that we used to be bad people and religion turned us into good people. It's what religion thinks it did, but it didn't. We're going to get into that. This explanation that I just presented, in a sense, subtracts meaning from religion, and that's what I already explained with faith. It's the empty cult. It's the emptiness of the cult, of people who follow a religion, but they don't know why. They cannot explain to you why, and they cannot really explain to you what the religion is about at all. And therefore, because they don't understand it, they also fail to see the formidable civilizational work that the churches have accomplished in Europe, where different people were impacted differently. So it goes back to the time of kings and knights and, in a sense, barbarians who were civilized by the church. It's what the church attempted to do. It attempted to tame men. And if you don't understand that, one, you're not going to be able to really grasp the role that religion played in the past. You might just generalize and say, oh, it was there to control people and to oppress people. Maybe you're correct, but you can't tell me why, and that's the problem. This is the why. It was actually, in a sense, a way to domesticate people. And also, in the same vein, in the same continuation, you will not be able to understand what modern religion has become because you don't understand what it used to be. Now, we get into a discussion that's very important, very controversial, and that people try to dodge when they discuss Nietzsche because it sort of shines a light on him that makes us modern men uncomfortable. And that is the importance of race. Nietzsche really put the onus on race when it comes to discussing the history of the European continent, because to him, religion and Christianity in particular had different impact, a different influence on different types of people. It's something he explained in the past, and I detailed. Poison to one is going to be golden beverage to another. It depends on your constitution entirely. And so, for Nietzsche, again, if we're going to look at this theory of races, Latins, so from the Mediterranean basin, southern Europe, are naturally more attached to the Catholic faith, while the birth of Protestantism, I'm really struggling tonight, amongst Northerners, so the Germans, the Celts, etc., can be explained by the spirit of the race, which favors unbelief. So to him, outside of religion, Italians, Spaniards, all of these groups of people were already predisposed to espousing Catholicism because they have more of a romantic soul. They have more of an exotic trait to them that makes them more prone to embrace that type of cult and worship entirely with no restraint whatsoever. And it's fascinating because it was proven true later on in life. Look at the type of cult, look at the type of Christianity embraced by Latinos, Mexicans, people from Southern America, look at Brazilians. Look at the way they worship God, look at the way they live their life as Christians. One could say, without blushing, that they are the most Christians of Christians because they are truly invested in it. They believe in God 100%. Their faith is unwavering. Why? There is no doubt in their mind. And if I were to extend the comparison, look at the US. Look at the difference between black churches and quote-unquote white churches. Even if they're both from the Catholic branch of Christianity, it is a completely entire difference. Why? Because race, the spirit of the race, has an impact on the type of religion. And that is almost impossible to disprove, but it's just something that is never discussed. And I think it's because we see differences as something that is, in a sense, a little bit taboo, and pointing it out makes people think that because you say that someone else is different, it means that they are lesser. That's not what I'm saying. It's just a different type of faith. And so in direct opposition with that Latin passion and energy and love for God, for the figure of God, you have the opposite. You have the northern tribes. You have Scandinavian countries. Why do you think Scandinavian countries are for the most part atheists? Yes, you can explain that with like the Cultural Revolution, you can explain that with socio-economical details, but in truth and in reality, it all boils down to one thing, the spirit of the race. The Northerners are simply not aligned with the type of adoration that Christianity and that type of religion requires, in a sense. It's no wonder why I will one day be able to pronounce that word. Protestantism, it doesn't even sound right in my mouth. Le protestantisme, you know what? Fuck it in French. C'est pour ça que le protestantisme was born there. It wasn't born in Italy. It was born in Germany, if I am not mistaken, by Luther. Why? Again, because of the spirit of the race. This is a group of people that is naturally more suspicious towards worship, and therefore they came up with a religion that aligns with the spirit of the race. And of course, Nietzsche is like that as well. He is one of these strong souls, as opposed to the beautiful souls, the souls of the Italians and the Spaniards. One is not better than the other. It's just that one is going to be naturally more critical towards religion. And if we were to explain the why, we need to go down to biology and the history of the race. We need to look at the ancient barbaric tribes that used to reside in these territories of the northern hemisphere that had a natural, in a sense, inclination towards certain types of worship, like animist religions or polytheist religions, and not towards monotheism. So when they were taken over by Christianity, there was an actual resistance to the entire principle. Whereas if you look at the way the Romans embraced Christianity, it makes you believe that it's maybe because they were more inclined to it in the first place. So this is for the idea of race, one that I find personally fascinating. I hope that you do as well. And it's important because it explains the dislike that Nietzsche has towards theology and towards religious philosophy. For example, French philosophy. That even though it sort of started to verse into atheism at some point, was always, in a sense, perfumed by the essence of God. And so, even the French skeptics sounded foreign to the German ear, for which the voluptuousness of religious thrills is nothing but niaiserie religieuse, when they compare the good to the religious and the virtuous to the pious. There is a very interesting moment and passage, and even a comical passage, in Beyond Good and Evil, where Nietzsche cites a French philosopher whose name I forgot, and who writes at the end that he was so angered by what he actually read in the book that he just covered his page in insults in French, writing stuff like la niaiserie religieuse, which means religious naivety. Why? Because for his spirit of the race, it made absolutely no sense. He could not understand why someone could be so engrossed with God to the point that it colored their entire philosophy. And it led them to think that to be virtuous, you have to be pious, and to be good, you have to be religious, which, to be fair, is still something that many people who worship God, Christianity, the God of Christianity, will tell you. They'll tell you that there is only one good, and that good is to be found in God. It's not something that Nietzsche invented. But it's sort of the start of the end for that type of religion, because it's when it started to lose its root. If we go back, I spoke about the ancient Romans, if we go back to the ancient Greeks as well, religion was always a thing. Groups of humans always came up with religion, but the onus and, in a sense, the motive and the motor and fuel of religion is what changed. So, for example, again, in ancient Greece, gratitude was at the center of religion. It always occupies the central piece. It is only later that it became tainted by fear and was eventually entirely replaced by it. And that's what I said, that Christianity devolved. That's Nietzsche's point. The Christian faith at the start was the same. It was based on gratitude. You look at the Middle Age, there was no fear involved. All of that talk about hell and purgatory and eternal flames, that's brand new. Basing the worship of God on the fact that if you do not worship Him, God is going to strike you down, is a new type of Christianity. Back in the days, it was all based on gratitude. Gratitude towards life, gratitude towards what you had, which was, in my opinion, a much better approach, because you cannot create people who are truly faithful if they are just deathly afraid. I know Christians, I live in a Christian country, and I can tell you that most Christians I meet are not truly Christians because they are constrained. It's not their choice. They do not follow and worship God by choice. They do it because they are forced by the community, they are forced by their family, and by morality in general. There is a pressure, an invisible pressure around their necks that is not exerted by the hands of God. It is exerted by the hands of society. And this is why their faith is void, shallow, and why the religion in general is ridiculed and made fun of. It's because even the people who call themselves Christians are not able to represent it because they are simply afraid. They follow the movement because they are afraid. And that taints it entirely. To Nietzsche, that slow, again, transvaluation that happened in ancient Greece was just Christianity preparing itself. So when you hear Nietzsche criticize Christianity, understand that he criticizes religion altogether, every single type of religion, because to him, the history of the race, if we go back to ancient Greece, was that at some point the plebeians started to outnumber the aristocrats in ancient Greece, and therefore their taste started to replace the taste of the elite. And the elite, which was grateful towards nature because they're the elite, they dominate, they're beautiful, they're strong, etc. So they must love the creator, was replaced by a group of people who were mean, meek, weak, etc., constantly demeaned by nature and therefore hated it, and could not, in their right mind, follow a God and love a God that would treat them as such. And therefore, what did they do? They replaced gratitude by fear. Now they follow God because they don't have a choice. If they don't do it, God is going to strike them down. But the question I have for you is, what type of God would do that, and would that type of God be worth following? Nietzsche's answer is no, and the second answer is, that is no God. You can call him Satan if you want to. I will just call him human. It's humans who came up with that, by replacing again gratitude by fear. When the populace gains the upper hand, plebeian tastes dominate, and slowly nature is designated as the enemy, replaced by a God that is apparently in total opposition with it. This is a key theme within Nietzschean philosophy, and also one that proves that he has nothing against God. In his mind, God was replaced by an impostor a long time ago. And it is that God, which we can call a false God, a false idol, that he attacks constantly, because he sees what following him has done to humans. He sees the regression in the human species. A regression that is caused by the fact that we had nature, aka God, that was eventually replaced by something that was the exact opposite of it. Again, by people who hated nature. Do same people still exist nowadays? You can say nowadays that they hate biology, which also means that they hate themselves, and therefore they hate the thing that created them, aka God. It's all connected. And it's all connected because it makes sense. It's a little bit out there, and it's a little bit jarring to hear. But even if you are religious, I urge you to actually listen to my words and to Nietzsche's words in reality, because this means that you have a way to strengthen your faith or to find it again if you had lost sight of it. At no point is Nietzsche telling you not to believe in God. He's telling you to believe in the right God, the God that is making you a better person, a God that is not entirely opposed to nature. Again, listen to the teachings of most modern religion and look at how opposed they are to nature. How does that make sense that a God that created everything would then come out and tell you to exist in opposition with everything he created, even in opposition with the way he created you? That doesn't make any sense, and therefore there is some questioning to be had. And this leads me to a very important distinction that I think sums up what I just said perfectly. There is a key contradiction between a God-fearing man and a man-fearing God. You want to be the first and not the former, because the God-fearing man is the one who has gratitude at the centerpiece of his religion, and the man-fearing God is the one that is no true believer. He is just doing it because he has no other choice. This transformation of the word can be seen in the Old versus New Testament, the former presenting men and things on such an immense scale that Greek literature has nothing to compare it with, and that the present-day Christians cannot relate to, but only regard in awe. So the metaphor continues, right? This transvaluation of the God of nature that was eventually replaced by the God of fear is also seen in, again, the immense contradiction that exists between Old and New Testament. Look at the Old Testament, look at the divinity to be found in it, look at the events depicted, and then connect it with the New Testament. It's the difference between fiction and reality. In one, you have things that inspire the soul. In the other, you have banalities and platitudes. And I'm not saying that to insult the New Testament, but in comparison, if you compare the two, it's true. And it's interesting because it's not just the Old Testament, it's the old word. Look at what the word used to be. Look at figures like Plato, for example. When you think of Plato, what do you think of? Of greatness. You don't even think of a man. You think of a demigod. Why? He existed at a time where men were still, in a sense, in possession of their divinity to the point that they could aspire to more. But nowadays we have been reduced to less, and we have been reduced to less by the fact that, again, nature, the abandonment of nature, had us scoped down. And now all of these things, again, of the Old Testament, we can only regard with admiration because we cannot relate. This is the reason why it feels like fiction, by the way. Men of old times who read the Old Testament most likely related because it felt like their life. Nowadays, it doesn't feel like our life at all. It feels like a fabrication. It's the reason why there is a difference between historical and biblical times. Even the story of Jesus sounds like fabrications. I'm not saying that it was real and that it happened. I'm just saying that if it did, we couldn't believe it the way we are now because it's too disconnected with what we know. It's the disenchantment of the wood, an important theme because religion participated in that to a great extent. But paradoxically, it also is the reason why religion died. The wood was a magical place, full of things unexplained. Religion came and tried to explain it, but the issue is that religion itself is this magical thing. Religion itself requires the absurd, the ability to accept things that don't make any sense. Jesus walked on water, he was resurrected, he could do miracles. All of that is magical because it doesn't align with our modern understanding of science. But because religion started to get rid of all of that, and I'm going on a tangent, but it was also the reason why religion was the number one reason why paganism disappeared, because Christianity could not handle the fact that there was magic existing outside of their miracles, so they had to get rid of it. It also, in a sense, participated in its own death because when you disenchant the world, you create humans that only believe in facts and reality, and therefore you mold them into beings that cannot accept your religion anymore, and that therefore, again, don't even relate with the New Testament, because that's the natural continuation. You lose sight of the Old Testament, then the New Testament, and then of life. But it's a point I'm going to be making later. The New Testament is closer to their hearts, the heart of Christian, because it is also further from nature. Man went from wild beast to house animal and now cannot fathom spending a night in the woods. That is that transformation that I described as well. The more you domesticate man, the less he's able to recall what he used to be and the wild beast that he used to be, to the point that he will come to believe that it was a fabrication in the first place, or he will start to segregate who he is to what he used to be. You see that with the modern man. Look at the way people think about the past, and they think that their ancestors were barbarians and savages and idiots. Why? They're trying to cut the cord. They do not want to be connected with that anymore. They do not want to believe that they used to be wild beasts, because if they actually accept that fact, they have to accept the fact that the beast never went anywhere. It is still there. They still have the capacity for it, and therefore it greatly scares them. And it explains also, and I know it's going to be quite shocking, but you need to hear it, why Nietzsche believed that the bonding of the Old and the New Testament into one book is akin to the juxtaposition between ancient and modern tastes, aka a sin against the spirit that explains all the contradictions with which man is faced. It's something that I believed even before I read Nietzsche. To be very honest with you, and to be blunt, I have never understood why the Old and the New Testament were paired together, and why Christians were supposed to believe the two at once when they are so clearly in contradiction with one another. If you're Christian, let me know in the comments what you understand of it. For me, I've always been a follower of the New Testament, meaning that what I take from Christianity is all in the New Testament. The Old Testament, again, I cannot relate to, and also it contradicts too much of what I believe is correct in the New Testament, which is something that Nietzsche disagrees with entirely, meaning that he is not one to say what I just say. To him, the New Testament was just another step in the domestication of man, working towards making him a farm animal. But it is also the, in a sense, juxtaposition between ancient and modern taste. It's the schizophrenia that man is faced with nowadays, where we are supposed to be modern men, and therefore it, in a sense, disconnects us from ancient men, and it creates that paradigm that is making so many people miserable. Now, it is also, and this is the main point of the video, what has led people towards atheism. Because we all, I think, that's my belief, we all sense that there is something strange here. That this amalgamation of ancient and new doesn't really make a lot of sense, and also is a little bit anachronical, and is enough to doubt the very validity of religion to start with, to the point that it has led people to questioning religion, and because religion was not able to answer certain questions, it led to the death of it. the natural continuation of religious skepticism is that it happens when God becomes unable to answer questions. If you are a believer, I'm sure you have heard atheists say that, asking you, hey, if God is all-knowing and all-good, how come there's war on earth? How come children die? How come when I pray nothing happens? How come when I ask a question to God, he doesn't answer? Of course, you're tired of hearing those things, but these are valid questions. And the issue is that with questioning comes renouncement. If the questions are not answered, then you give up. It's the reason why ancient faith was so important. Ancient faith did not allow questions because the questionment, the interrogation was faith. The constant rehashing of the existence of God was faith. It was the perpetual pain of temptation, the perpetual pain of interrogation that went away when religion was supposed to become something that explains everything, that attempted to explain everything, but simply could not because it could not answer the simplest questions and therefore gave way to atheism. If you are an atheist and you're watching this video right now, this is why you're an atheist. Atheism is the natural continuation of Christianity, meaning that it's also religion. It's just the next step, meaning that you start by believing everything and then you believe slightly less to the point where you believe nothing. It's logical. And actually I saw a cartoon that perfectly represented that. It was a man dressed in a clerical robe, so clearly someone who was a devout Christian, was going up down a stair. And on every single step was another question. Like, for example, how was the Virgin Mary still a virgin? How was Jesus brought back? All of these things that, again, the logical mind of humans are going to point out and rightfully question religion with, that religion cannot answer because there's no answer. All of that is symbolical and allegorical. And with each question, the guy comes down one stair and one stair and one stair to the point that he's at the bottom of the staircase. And what is written at the bottom of the staircase? Atheism. That is how you create atheists. And it's the reason why there's so many of them. See, religion didn't really die. God didn't really die. We just replaced him with something else. Now we have a God made of plastic, and the people who worship him are called atheists. It's the reason why, by the way, most religions have a tendency to refuse to represent their gods or their prophets. It's to make sure you cannot put a human figure on God so that it remains a mystery. You look at Islam. Islam perfectly understands that. You cannot represent God, you cannot represent the prophet or any type of idols after their image. Why? Because if you start doing that, you devalue the deity, you start to bring them down to your level, and once God is to your level, there is no reason to worship him anymore, so the religion dies. It is incredibly important to understand men do not follow someone that is like them. We only follow superiors. And because the God of Christianity lost that, he lost also his status as the Father, which was the only thing that kept it alive in reality. The slave takeover has him, God, after our image. It's what I said before, the God of nature, the God of the Ancient Testament that was all-knowing and terrifying, because the God of the Old Testament is terrifying for a reason, was replaced by something nicer. It's what I call la religion du gentil Jésus. Look at Christianity nowadays. Look at the way they talk about Jesus. It sounds like they're talking about a guy who lives down in California and smokes weed and surfs. There is no respect, there's no deference there. Why? He was brought down to our level because we represent him, we gave him a human figure, and we try to make him after our image. And when man makes God after his image, God dies. And also vice versa, when God stops making humans after his image, humans die. And it's what happened both ways. Because again, refuting the Father in God is the death of God. It's how he died. And since now, the only authority deemed acceptable is that of the self on the self, something that would later be abandoned as well, the Creator is now as much of a tamed animal as his children. A fallible God is no God. This is the logic behind Nietzsche's entire expose. He explains what happened to God. He explains why he detests religion. It's because what you worship in reality is not really God. It is something else. It is something that was created artificially. And that has no authority also, which also teaches men that since God has no authority on them, because now he has no power anymore, then they don't really need to have any authority on themselves at all. And that's again atheism, the birth of anarchism, and all of these movements that seek to not only refute nature, but also refute the domination and the social hierarchies that exist naturally within it. Something that will be exposed and discussed later, I am certain, because it's a key theme of modernity. And that is pretty much that for this paragraph. Again, with all of what I just exposed, and with the failure of God, ancient faith dies. And with it, theist satisfaction. Only the subjection remains. And we're going back into the idea of morality and why Christian morality somehow survived even though the Christian faith died. It's very simple. It's because faith was transvaluated, but it wasn't entirely removed. You see, what faith used to be, I keep saying faith used to be, was that theist satisfaction. You derived pleasure and enlightenment from the absolute belief in God. It was the snake that bites its own tail. The image is not the best because we all know that the snake represents Satan, but that's the way it functioned. But when you remove that, when you remove faith, you remove the satisfaction in knowing that you're serving an almighty God. Again, I hate to do it, but look at Islam. Look at the God of Islam. Look at how much they insist on the fact that God is all-knowing. He created everything. He controls everything. Why do they do that? They do it because if you're going to worship a God, you want a God that is perfect. Because if he's not perfect, why would you even worship him in the first place? By making God look good, Christians, or rather Muslims in this case, make themselves and their religion look good. And by making God look bad and allowing humiliations, Christians made themselves look bad. And because no one wants to follow a weak religion, Christianity eventually died. But the subjection remained, because the subjection was a key aspect of manipulating people into following the code in the first place, and that is the slave insurrection. The slave kept the part of their identity that made sense to them, which is being subjected. So they kept the fear of God. That never went anywhere. But they had no ability to love nature and love themselves, so they got rid of the satisfaction. And this is the religion that we have nowadays. That's what we're left with. And it's on top of that hypocritical, because this is what is known as slave morality. And the problem with slave morality is that, for the most part, it is only put in place because the person that follow it have no choice. The slave is a slave, and he creates the ideology of a slave because he is a slave. In reality, again, it's the spirit of the race that comes back to bite you in the ass. Weak men create weak ideologies. And it's the proof is in the pudding, because if you gave strength to these people, they would abandon that like this, and they would immediately go back to will to power. Will to power is at the center of every healthy religion that is consumed by healthy and strong males. It is immediately dashed when it's concerned and it's directed towards slaves, because slaves have no will to power. They are subjected to the will to power of other people. But again, if you give it to a slave, if you give power and dominance to a slave, they will immediately abandon that slave morality because they are not a slave anymore. So that's important, because one could state that in this new type of faith and the transvaluation, there is still value. It would be true only if the people that followed it were actually righteous and actually believed in what they preached. But again, they have no choice. It's fear that dictates their action. And it's not just the slave insurrection that did that. Modern philosophy has been a great proponent of this attentat against Christian certitudes. The metaphor of the stair I just described. Of course, philosophers came into the mix and they started to question. But the issue is that there is no answer to the question of God. Again, if you're a true believer, you know that. If someone tells you, prove me that God exists, your answer should be, he exists. Because it's not provable. You cannot prove it. And I see a lot of people who call themselves religious, and Islam actually falls into that as well, where they desperately try to explain their religion using scientific principles. So, for example, the miracles of the Quran that apparently prove that all of that was dictated by an all-knowing being, because in the Quran there are certain phenomena that science explained later on, which prove that it's all true. The issue is that all of these miracles, for the most part, are not proven by science or are so vague that they prove nothing. But it's an issue because it creates a loophole. When you start explaining your religion to people, you open up the bag. The cat is out of the bag now. People are going to keep asking questions. And this is why also you are starting to see more atheists coming from the Muslim world. Why? Because Islam also started to, in a sense, incorporate itself into the Western world. But the issue is that the Western world was already infected by that non-faith, that non-belief. And so the very people that lived there, who had the spirit of the race, of a kind of people that had the belief of faith, were slowly modified and turned into atheists because they started to question everything. Again, no judgment of value here. Nietzsche is not saying that that's a bad thing. If anything, he likes that. He likes that religion was questioned. What he doesn't like is what happened. Because the only thing that religion and the questioning of religion did is that it killed faith. But we are still stuck with the subjection, and that is the problem. So that's also the proof that modern philosophy that killed religion, especially in France, it's the reason why I told you that the atheist movement can be pinned on France for the most part with Les Lumières, which were religious philosophers that started to question religion and therefore killed it, but weren't anti-religious at all. It's just that it attempted to ditch the courts and keep the morals. And that's typical. And it's something you still see to this day, where people who say that they're not Christian or not religious have moral standards that are Christian. It's just that they kept the morality and they ditched the rest. So it's morality without spirituality, which for the most part is entirely useless. And to Nietzsche, the first victim of that attentat, again, was the soul, without which there can be no faith. Quotation: formerly, one believed in the soul as one believed in grammar. So, the belief of the soul was the same as the belief in God. It was an absolute belief that wasn't based on logic. It was causa sui. It explained itself. It did not lend itself to interrogations. But the second it did, and the second philosophers started to question the existence of the soul, now the door was burst open. Because if you move away from the certitude of the soul, you will eventually come to the realization that there is no such thing as the soul. We used to think that I equated the soul, that I was my soul, and that it was being the subject. We were the subject at the center of it, and that think and faith were the predicate of it. So the creation of it, the faith was directly incumbent on the soul. You needed a soul to actually be able to experience faith, and not the other way around, which was so important. Because if you reverse that certitude, then the self only becomes a synthesis which was made by thinking itself. Now you say that the soul is incumbent on faith, and therefore you try to prove the existence of the soul via faith. But because faith can only exist if you have a soul, you have opened Pandora's box and you have disproven both. Both faith and the soul disappear because you have turned faith into a performative act that is the necessary requirement for the existence of the actor. I hope this is clear. It is in my head. If it's not, look at the pinned comment. Written down, it should make more sense. But in summary, because the faith now creates the soul, its existence cannot be proven through action anymore. It cannot be detected because the soul is not a tangible thing, and therefore it ceases to exist. Anti-absurdity is death to faith. The second you refuse the portion of the absurd that exists in every single religion, your faith in God will die entirely. It's something that Nietzsche diagnosed, that Nietzsche resented because he saw the importance of it, and he understood also that this world without the absurd would be worse for it. This world without God would be worse for it, because if God dies, it's because we killed him, and if we killed him, it's also because we killed ourselves, because we are, in a sense, the children of God, and he exists through us. So it's the reason why I also have a deep-rooted resentment towards religious people, especially Christians, who hate Nietzsche because he said God is dead. I even, during my research, saw people gloating, saying, well, Nietzsche is dead and God is still alive. It's so petty and childish, but it truly proves that Nietzsche was correct, that these people are not religious, they don't understand shit. First off, their God is not alive, their God is a puppet that they created to justify their life. And two, what Nietzsche was saying when he said God is dead is that he was, in a sense, announcing the end of an age and the birth of a new one where humans won't really be humans anymore. When Nietzsche says God is dead, he's not gloating. It's regretful. He is saying that God used to be alive and it was a good thing, and now he is gone. He left us, replaced by, again, an imposter. When Nietzsche says God is dead, he is essentially saying that you are dead. And it's this relentless attack against religious absolutism, that we can call absolutism as well, that is a symptom of the slave revolt, that cannot stand its cruelty, which Nietzsche actually separates between three periods. So we're looping back a bit, but it's because I'm starting to introduce the segment for in 2 weeks that is going to focus itself mainly on modernity. It is the hatred of pain, again, that created the slave revolt. They couldn't stand the pain of faith, which is absolutely necessary, as I already proved. And it's that cruelty of God that they resented as well. Again, look at the Old Testament. God is not a nice guy. But it's important that he's not a nice guy because he's not you. He's supposed to be the father. Father figures are supposed to be the one to discipline. They're not supposed to be the one who love unconditionally. That new age God and Jesus is again a fabrication of an age of people who couldn't stand the cruelty of the old God. And that cruelty was perfectly represented during 3 periods. The first was the days of human sacrifice, where God, as we know him, didn't exist. Meaning that the God of Christianity, of Islam, didn't exist, but humans still sacrificed their own to a God. The God of what? Well, no, the God of nature, the juju of the mountain, whatever. There was still the idea that there was a presence out there and that killing humans would appease it. So that was the first stage of human cruelty. Then there was the moral epoch of instinct castration, wherein human nature is castigated for God. So this is the one that we can describe as the Middle Age, where it was no human sacrifice anymore. Instead, humans killed something in them. So for example, they killed our gluttony, they killed our sex drive, they killed the things that were natural and instinctual, but that they sacrificed to God in order to become closer to him, because God is in a sense the perfect human and we are to be more like him. In the understanding of modern religion, of course, if you look at God in, again, the Greek or the Roman religions, look at Zeus. Zeus was a rapist. Zeus was a glutton. Why? He was after nature. These groups of people, via the spirit of the race, made gods that looked like them and acted like them. It is with the birth of Stoicism that we started to see a resurgence of a more perfect man, as in opposed to his instincts, because Stoicism is mostly the shaming of instincts, which is the reason why Nietzsche had a problem with it, because he said that to him, Stoics were hypocrites because they pointed out nature and saying that they are like nature, but in reality they are the opposite of nature, because nature is not calm, it's not patient, it's not non-violent, it's the opposite of it entirely. And just like that, I connected Stoicism with Nietzsche and with religion, because everything is connected in truth. I am having a hell of a time. I hope you're enjoying this episode as well. But let us recenter. So that is the time where humans sacrifice their instinct to become better people and therefore to become closer to God. But that didn't last for a long time, because that also implied that you had to sacrifice something, and humans resented that cruelty. So it led to the logical conclusion and the next step, the sacrifice of everything holy, including God itself. Because if you get to the point where you cannot stand God's cruelty anymore, what is the next thing you're going to sacrifice? Him. And it's what happened in the wood. We replaced the God of nature, the God of the Old Testament, with a new age God that is nice and doesn't require anything of us. Look at modern religions. There are no requisites. You don't have to do anything. You just have to say, oh, I'm a Christian, and it makes you a good person. Again, look at the religions that still have some sense to them, like forms of Orthodox Christianity. Islam, some branch of Protestantism, Catholicism in certain countries that are still hardcore. What have they conserved? They have conserved the sacrifice, they have conserved the difficulty, they have conserved the pain. This is what makes their religion still intact to this day, because they are still in the moral epoch. Understand that Nietzsche believes that the moral epoch was the best one. In terms of the existing ones, meaning that there is the pre-moral epoch, the moral epoch, and what we live nowadays, the past moral epoch, Nietzsche believes in a fourth one that is the rise of the Übermensch. We're going to discuss when we read Zarathustra. It's not the topic at hand today, but we are past that nowadays. The moral epoch is God. God was sacrificed on the cross a second time, meaning that there was the sacrifice of Jesus, and then we re-sacrificed him again, this time to get rid of him entirely, which is the natural progression of Christianity in Europe during that the moral age I just described. That precipitated its fall, meaning that because humans went as far as to kill and sacrifice instincts to appease and to resemble God, it was only logical that at some point it would devolve. The evolution was going to continue. The trigger in this particular instance was the slave revolt. It could have been anything else. It should be a warning sign for other types of religion to not fall for the same pitfalls and actually prevent that from happening within their own self. But we're not entirely done, because it is too easy to think that the slave revolt is something that happened once in the past and was gone entirely. In truth, the slaves are still here. Only now they worship idols of a different kind, or sometimes even nothing at all. This is the part where the spirit is shattered entirely, because one could think that if we were to espouse the belief of, and this, if I can manage to pronounce this word the first time, I'm a beast. Accelerationism, I think this is correct. L'accélération, which is now a philosophy apparently of seeing that the house is on fire and deciding to just put more fuel on it to get rid of it entirely. You could tell me, well, okay, religion is now dead and we're apparently in the past moral period, but isn't that the sign that it's going to have a rebirth? Or even, isn't that the sign that this is better now? Well, no, because I already told you, we still kept the subjection. The subjection to morals is still there. We just got rid of the faith, which was the one good thing about religion to start with. And so we still see nowadays the same type of behaviors of idolatry, of worship, of blind morality that was present back then, but without the faith, which makes it even more toxic and even more disgusting. Look at the amount of people that worship celebrities. Look at the amount of people that worship material possessions. Why are they doing that? They're doing it because it is ingrained in human DNAs to worship something. We always do. It is my firm belief now that regardless of who you are and where you are on the planet, if you put groups of humans together, they will start to worship something. And if it's not a god, they worship a dog. And if it's not a dog, they will worship money. The biggest god and the number one religion on earth right now is the religion of money. It is still a religion. It is still faith in something. It is still a type of worship. Or, and this is the teasing for the next episode, or people verse into atheism, which is the belief in nothing, which in itself is a type of belief because it's nonsensical. And if you're an atheist and you've never thought about that, understand that your entire ideology is an ideology of void. You believe nothing, but you still believe something. And this, by the way, was described by Nietzsche as the worst type of ideology. It's nihilism. It is better to believe in something wrong than to believe in nothing at all. And worse than that, you don't even believe in nothing at all. You believe in the existence of nothing. So it is, you essentially worship a black hole. You've replaced the figure of God, the divine light of God, to the worship of black holes, which is, I think, perfectly aligned with what I'm going to be talking about next week, because it's the reason why so many atheists worship science. It's a new God. It's the God of science. It's a different type of God, but it's still one. And they believe him just as strongly. Because, at the end of the day, again, atheism is just the natural next step to Christianity that went rampant and mad, and it's just a contrarian notion that only exists in its opposition with theism. which should also wake up the people that call themselves atheists. You only exist because religion exists, meaning that if religion wasn't a thing, you wouldn't exist. It also is proven by the fact that many atheists are obsessed with religion, showing that it's not that they don't care, it's that they are trying to defend their own church. And their church is opposed to the church of religion, so that's what they do. Without theism, there can be no atheism. It is in the name. And that is this inversion of values that started as a coping mechanism by the slaves who were trying to explain their condition as slaves, but that soon became a culture, the culture of slave morality, that was created by plebeians that represent the majority and therefore had an ability in that fashion to take revenge on the strong by presenting them as people who are amoral, by making weakness into morality, which at the end of the day did not serve their interest because they're still weak and they're still suffering from their weakness, but they have told themselves that the nature that made them weak was a false god and an evil god. They replaced it by a plastic idol that is making their life better and helps them cope in a sense with their condition, and so it is not going to end anytime soon, sadly. That is the birth of the modern god of atheism, the birth of the modern man, you and I, the sad, pathetic existences that we lead nowadays, that I'm going to be discussing next week. Thank you for watching this video. And actually I said next week, I lied, it's in 2 weeks. Have a good night.